with Saudi Arabia that has been utterly counterproductive, that is outside of the very values we aspire and purport to follow. This is the last potentially absolute monarchy / theocracy on earth. And the kingdom has not always had control of all of its princes and all of its elements. And so even in the cases where the Saudi official government stance wasn't anti-American per se, although I think in certain cases it has been that, there were elements within this, bureaucracy. There's a lot of smoke surrounding Saudi involvement in 9/11 at certain official levels. But even if we were to put a pin in that and say, to what extent were the Saudis' ideology motivators, right, for the 15 out of 19 hijackers and who knows how many planners of 9/11 who were in fact Saudi? And to what extent has our following kind of down the Saudi rabbit hole, fighting their foreign policy and Israel's foreign policy, which sometimes actually align more often than not these days, against our own interests, thereby sullying our name in the Arab world, so that not only did those 2,977, I believe, American folks die on 9/11, but I found myself fighting wars on the Saudis' behalf in many cases, or fighting wars, say, on Israel's behalf, or that, on the neoconservatives' behalf, where the Saudis were actually tacitly, at the very least, backing some of the insurgents that were attacking me. I mean, this is the insanity, the absurdity, and the farce of American foreign policy since 9/11, and the fact that we still can't get complete answers to these families, that it took so long for the 14 or 21 pages that weren't even that intense in, say, the 9/11 reports to come out, is proof that our government's priority is not the victims. They may pay some money out, but it's as much hush money as anything else.
So what's in it for them to stall this kind of information? I mean, the thing that I don't understand is I know that the Trump administration has tried to, strengthen relationships with this new Saudi prince. But I thought with the Obama administration, which apparently the kind of permanent bureaucracy in D.C. tends to lean towards the kind of foreign policy as reflected by Bush, Obama, Biden, Clinton type. But I thought that the consensus of the D.C. establishment had moved away from Saudi Arabia and towards Qatar and some other, competitor nations in that region, and Iran to deal with that and stuff. So what I don't understand is why was that same establishment that had kind of soured on, Saudi Arabia is not the coolest thing anymore. We're going to kind of go with somebody else that's paying better or a better ally. And yet they're still not wanting to let people know the information that they have as to which Saudi officials did what on 9/11, I can't understand that.
So it's a great point, and I'll say two things about it. I think number one, to keep in mind, is I don't think we ever did. I don't think our establishment in either party in the duopoly ever did fully move away from the Saudis, despite rhetoric to the contrary. I mean, there were some minor moves, but I think that relationship remains relatively strong. The arms sales help prove that. Some of the more cosmetic stuff like sword dancing and, Trump's first trip overseas being to Saudi Arabia, demonstrate that there's still a power there. But I think the biggest thing is the thing that I found with government bureaucracies, and I think the government more generally, is what they are most upset about, what most is fearful for them, what they will most hammer you about is embarrassing them, right? They will tolerate incompetence, but the minute you speak out or expose something that embarrasses them, that's a problem. And so when you look at this Saudi involvement and how much the government knew and when, that would be the ultimate sort of airing of American dirty laundry. And I think that one of the reasons that it hasn't changed as administrations change is that because both parties are sort of implicated, right? Mm-hmm. Key figures in both the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment have been complicit in this relationship and continue to be, but were especially so on 9/11 and in the years previous. that nobody wants this out who has any power, because there are professional, pecuniary, and reputational interests at stake. And this government will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid that kind of exposure, because they don't want to have an honest conversation. They want to bury the dead, commemorate them once a year, pay out some money if necessary, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all about keep saving face, and even when they've making a big disgrace with what they've done, it's just save their face at all costs. But we're going to dive into this some more, but in the meantime, I want folks to check out my guest's book. He's a retired major U.S. Army, and his book out now is called Patriotic Dissent. So if you got pen and paper, if you're listening, remember this book, Patriotic Dissent, America in the Age of Endless War. I'm all about skin in the game, meaning, we want to hear from folks who have skin in the game when they're commenting about what we should do. We don't want to hear from armchair quarterbacks that want us in perpetual war or people that want us in perpetual debt. We got to have people with skin in the game. And that's what we're talking about today on 9/11. Back in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice with Danny Shorson.
You know what time of year it is.
Hurricane conditions in the next 36 hours.
You know what hurricanes can do.
Devastating damage expected.
Well, we want you to know, no matter how bad things get,
Power outages.
This is life-threatening.
you can stay up to date with the latest information here. Your home for news, talk, and information. And remember, we'll keep an eye on the tropics. You keep an ear on us.
Got batteries in the flashlight.
The all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Yeah, we got our radio.
Out-of-control wildfires in western states now blamed for at least 17 deaths. California fires have charred 3 million acres so far this year. ABC's Alex Stone is in Los Angeles.
With a call going out wide for help to relieve exhausted firefighters, New Jersey, Idaho, Texas, Montana, and New Mexico have sent fire engines here to help. Israel sent in a team of firefighters to get on the front lines and offer help. Right now, there are 28 active fires in California alone.
Ceremonies today marking 19 years since the September 11th attack. Those attacks killed nearly 3,000 people in New York City, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that after terrorists hijacked commercial planes. On Monday, a new change to travel here in the U.S. since the start of the coronavirus outbreak. Travelers from several countries, including China and most of Europe, will no longer be screened for COVID when they land at U.S. airports. The CDC now says it's not necessary. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. We're soaring high across the Sunshine State, FM and AM, and worldwide on our podcast and website, neighborschoice.com. I'm here with author, podcaster, writer, retired Major Danny Shorson, author of the new book, Patriotic Dissent, America in the Age of Endless War, which is out now. I want you to check it out, new book. And you got to read from folks with skin in the game when you want to understand how we should do our foreign policy. And also check out his website, skepticalvet.com. So, Danny, one of the things that people say, I've heard it said, is that, well, you see, the reason why the Trump administration has made great friends with this new Crown Prince Salman is because he did all the roundup. And he was cracking down and arresting. And remember with Trump's speech about we got to drive them out, drive the terrorists out, drive them out of the Muslim world. And he did that in Saudi Arabia, and there was kind of there's been the argument in favor of whatever Trump's doing with Saudi Arabia is, look, there's a new sheriff in town in Saudi Arabia, and he's been cleaning the cobwebs out of all the folks who may have had some involvement in the terrorist funding and activities like in 9/11. What's your response to that?
Well, certainly Trump appears to be amenable to strong men, right? And also rather transactional. And no doubt MBS, right, Mohammed bin Salman, has been involved in the security apparatus for some time. He's a mover, he's a shaker, he's decisive on some levels. But let us remember that the Saudi state, such as it is, with and without his involvement ever since 9/11, has been rather schizophrenic about its internal and external relationship with Islamist jihadis of various flavors, including the al-Qaeda affiliates within Saudi Arabia, within Yemen, and then over the border in Iraq and now Syria. For the most part, the Saudi position, the script for the Saudis, has been to actually bolster back, sometimes arm and funds, and at the very least, turn the other way, look the other way, these very Sunni Islamist jihadi groups, including al-Qaeda affiliates, until, and this is what always happens, that boomerangs back into a security threat to their state, at which point there's then a massive crackdown internally in the kingdom. There was a very significant one in like the 2002 through 2005 period when there was a real threat to the princes, to the king and the kingdom. And then it kind of repeats itself, because what we have found, and America has found this just as well, haven't we, that proxies tend to start, like your children, to have a mind of their own after a while. And their values and their tactics and even their position against you in yourself tends to sometimes change. And it can often work at cross purposes and become a threat to you. And so I wouldn't be too impressed by MBS or any other Saudi official who's been tough on terror at one time or another, because the repetitive cycle is that then they don't learn that lesson and have to play the script out all over again in supporting these proxies who tend to be of the Wahhabi Sunni Islamist variety. So, I don't trust the Saudis as far as I could throw them. I don't think there's been a single aspect of that relationship that has ultimately been positive for the U.S. in the long term, and frankly, not even very often in the short term.
Yeah, it's a disturbing story, and I want to switch gears for a moment, though, about something maybe even more disturbing than our alliance with Saudi Arabia, which is, I believe I've kind of been laying this out on radio, that there's this disturbing need that our country has had, both from an economic standpoint, because so much of our economy is built on maintaining militarism, but also psychologically, we needed to have, boogeymen around the world to unite our country, because it's got a lot of internal divisions. And, you have the boogeyman of the world wars, you have the boogeyman of communism, and then you have the Soviet Union, and you have the boogeyman of, terrorists, and Saddam Hussein. And what you can see is in recent years, there's been an exponential weakening of the believability in the latest boogeyman that we must unite against. So you look at the public support and enthusiasm for going after Saddam Hussein, then you look at it how it compares to Gaddafi, and it's a drop-off. Then you look at it and compared to the campaign to go after Assad, another big drop-off. And, I have a theory, Danny, that some of the things that we see in our country in which we're turning inward and we're fighting each other in the streets is because we don't have a unifying scapegoat. So some cynical folks in power might say, look, if you come up to the top of the mountaintop with us, you'll realize that we have to have these foreign adversaries, because without it, look at the chaos internally that's going to happen, where people are fighting in the streets of Portland and battling, and they're doing mock play, like almost like mock little teaser attempts at civil war and revolution in the streets. And so it's kind of a cynical, kind of dark way to look at war. But is that not an argument for why the establishment needs to keep us always going after somebody else, because that way we don't tear each other apart?
Well, I think there's 2 points that you raised that are extremely important here. The first is the sort of transactional and surface level one of, there are folks who profit from these wars, right? In the military industrial complex, professionally within the sort of national security bureaucracy, which is a behemoth and growing at alarming rates since 9/11, really since the Second World War. And it reminds me of Upton Sinclair's quote, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. But to me, that's not even the biggest problem. The broader one is the other point you raised, which is societies, as they become militarized, as they seek to or I should say governments, as they seek to control society, as they militarize the culture, as they want to gather more centralized power for themselves, depend historically and necessarily / conceptually on an external enemy. And so one way to look at this is think back to, even if you're a progressive, right? Even for like a lefty, or someone who's that, okay? Think back on all the people that we sort of laud from our past, many of them, okay? I'm talking historical figures in the women's rights movement, in the civil rights movement, MLK, for example, right? In the labor rights movement. If you're into that, okay, think about a lot of those figures. And remember that we may laud them with holidays now, and both parties may speak positively about someone like King. But in their day, they were usually wildly unpopular, attacked by the government, and painted as secretly loyal to another enemy ideology or enemy state. So they were communists, they were Reds, now they're Russian assets or they're Chinese assets, right? They're sort of useful idiots. It has always been thus, right? Even King, for example, had a 70% disapproval rating upon his death in 1968, which was actually a lower approval rating than he had 5 years earlier. Now, if that doesn't dispel the myth of sort of direct and linear progression in our civil rights and society, then I don't know what does. But the reason is because he started to criticize the sacred cows that polite America didn't like, even liberal polite America liked going against the war. So the point here is that if you want to discipline a society, you have to have an external enemy to point to. And I think your final point that I want to hone in on is this like Hitler analogy. Our enemies are always Hitler. We're stuck on that World War II arrested development in our foreign policy intellect. And so if everyone is Hitler, if every enemy is Hitler, the analogy may keep getting used, but it has diminishing returns. Because like you said, first it was, Saddam, or, remember George H.W. Bush, Saddam, this line in the sand will not stand. He's basically the new Hitler. And then it's Gaddafi, and now it's Bashar al-Assad. And it's always somebody, but there's a point where that analogy not only loses its kind of intellectual merit, but it becomes highly dangerous. Because if you could paint any external enemy as Hitler, i.e. the worst in our minds, then anything is permitted. And many people, American soldiers and civilians, can die in the struggle to take the new Hitler down. But we must grapple with the reality of who is really a vital and existential national security threat to the United States. And I would argue not a single element that we fought since 9/11 has been that.
Mm-hmm. And along those lines, I want to pull out this quote that Trump said on Labor Day. He said, "I'm not saying the military is in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably are not, because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy. But we're getting out of the endless wars." Now, I have a lot to disagree with Trump on, but it is pretty shocking to hear a president say that. And it's pretty telling that this is a president who's been the most hated by all media I've seen in my lifetime, a media that seems to love war. What's your take on this? Do you think he's right about this?
Well, here's where I get myself in trouble, right, with my polite liberal friends. Okay, I loathe Trump in terms of his character and most of his policies. I wouldn't like to spend 2 minutes in an elevator with the guy. And I don't think he's followed through on most of his endless wars rhetoric. Putting that aside, let's be clear. What he said isn't wrong about the higher level leadership of our military. And more disturbing, I'm not one of them, but I can tell you anecdotally and also empirically, this is true too. The soldiers are not as anti-Trump as we might like them to be. So the generals might be, but he is more popular than it is polite to admit with sort of the rank and file. And what he said about the generals profiting from these wars is an important point. So whether you think it is a good or a bad thing, I tend to think it's the latter, that soldiers have a sort of positive view of Trump, or that many do, not all, and maybe buy into some of his rhetoric of ending endless wars, which I actually understand because they're desperate to end them, right? And they're not hearing that from many other quarters, or at least not many in the establishment. Remember, the sergeants who lose their legs and lose their minds fighting these wars repeatedly at the ground level in the breach, there is no revolving door for them. There is no revolving door into lobbying for Lockheed Martin like there is for the generals and some of the senior colonels. I mean, there's a revolving door, but it's into mental health treatment at their local VA in Walla Walla, Washington. Okay? That's their revolving door. And so if we don't recognize that and don't give credence to what Trump is saying, we can say the messenger is flawed. We could even say the messenger is a monster. But for a president of the United States to critique the senior ranks of his military and their corrupt revolution from inside uniform to inside the defense industry boardrooms, that's a profound thing. And it should not be taken lightly. And we can dislike the president and even most of his policies. But if we dismiss that, we are outing ourselves as establishment, Democrats and Republicans, as complicit in the systemic militarism that those elites benefit from. So I'm going to say, and anger everybody, Big Lebowski style, he may be an a-hole, but he's not wrong. Okay?
Well, Kamala Harris, she styles herself a Harry Truman Democrat, I've heard. So she's going to be, running, Joe Biden is someone who loves going to war. So I think if your issue is, do you want more war or less war? I think Trump's going to be your bet between Biden, Harris, and Trump. Mike Pence, if he were to get in office, I think he would be kind of like a George W. Bush. But I think that when it comes to the war issue, I think that people have this obsession with words over bombs. It's like if you say crass words, if you say hateful words, if you talk about how you brag about your wealth and you brag about a golden toilet, that somehow that's a worse offense than going to a war that you shouldn't be in. And how come people can't see that? I don't understand that.
Right, well, I agree with this. I think what you're saying here is that people focus on the cosmetic and the language rather than the actions. And so I think some of Trump's actions overseas have been abhorrent. But we have to admit some inconvenient facts. And this isn't me saying I support Trump. My God, I would never vote for the man. But what I'm saying to you is, look at the data on death, even just of American soldiers, okay? The polite Emperor Obama, who I supported at one time, he was responsible for a second surge into Afghanistan, these drone strikes. I mean, lots more death, lots more boots on the ground overseas. This doesn't mean that Trump is our best option. It means we have to be honest about it. And so if we get caught up, like you said, in the coarse language, in the cosmetic aspects of what makes Trump so loathsome, and then, avoid what it really means in terms of foreign policy, then what we're going to do is we're going to get Biden on January 21st, on January 20th, and then on January 21st, we're going to go back to business as usual, which is what he's promising, okay, in those words. And this systemic militarism will continue. And what I'm afraid of, and this doesn't mean I think I want Trump to stay president, but what I'm afraid of is that if we don't hold the Democrats or the next Republicans' feet to the fire, then the people who are yelling loudly right now about foreign policy and other issues are going to just disappear quietly back into the woodwork, the boardrooms, the pensions, right? And let the system continue as is, because at least we don't have that oaf, right? That monster in charge of us. But business as usual might just continue.
And it's so creepy how, it's pathetic, too, how pro wrestling, the whole thing is. Because I remember in 2004, the media, they made John Kerry out to be this anti-war, very vibrant progressive, and you had the Swift boat ads, and he was denouncing the Iraq war, and he was like this bold, visionary, peace hippie guy from the past of, coming to fight against this fascist Bush. And now they trot this same character out in 2020, and he's at the DNC talking about, we need to go back to putting the troops on the ground. He sounds like Dick Cheney. And like, what happened? It's like, when Hulk Hogan was red and yellow, then he turns black and white, NWO, and you're like, what? It's the same character. You're just playing a different character now. What's going on here? You're the pro-peace guy. Now you're the Dick Cheney. What your script is not very believable. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's in some ways perfect that, a former, WWE/reality star became president.
Yeah.
In a way, he reflects politics in Washington as it's been for quite some time. Now we're all up in arms about it, but, he's symptom, not cause.
Yeah, it's funny. When you put a joke, a parody inside of a parody, it reveals the parody for what it was all along. Let's continue with Danny Shorson, who is a U.S. Army Major vet. He's retired. He's also he graduated from West Point. He's the host of the podcast Fortress on a Hill, which you want to check out. Veterans podcast called Fortress on a Hill. And his new book is out today, which is called, or it's been out. It's called Patriotic Descent: America in the Age of Endless War. We'll come back in just a moment with more thoughts on this anniversary of 9/11. Back in just a moment. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
Looking to enhance your workout at home social distancing? There's no better way to do that than with a post-workout supplement from Fortify. It's the new all-in-one pre- and post-workout supplement. It's completely all-natural. There are no artificial flavors or sweeteners. Fortify Fit is the first of its type in the U.S. Fortify Fit combines all 10 of the latest sports nutrition ingredients in one canister. Build muscle, strength, endurance with Fortify Fit. Plus, it'll kickstart your immune system quickly, safely. Right now, you receive 25% off by using the code RADIO. Use the code RADIO to receive the 25% off discount. Fortify Fit, created and designed by board-certified Dr. Michael Lang. You know him as the radio host of Ask the Doctor. Get Fortify Fit with 2 delicious flavors, strawberry watermelon and fruit punch. Amazing results when using pre- and post-workouts. Fortify Fit, available at fortify.com. That's FORTIFEYE.com. Remember the EYE in Fortify. Dr. Michael Lang's Fortify Fit with 2 delicious flavors, keeping America fit and healthy during this time of precautionary change.
For over 18 years, I've enjoyed an AV rating of 5.0 out of 5.0 from Martindale-Hubbell. I received this from my fellow lawyers and judges. If you've been injured, call Diaco Law at 888-SOS-FIRM. At Diaco Law, we will take your call.
Medical malpractice or wrongful death? Call SOS. Call Diaco Law at 888-SOS-FIRM for a free injury case evaluation.
And remember, there's no fees or costs unless we win. At Diaco Law, we will take your call.
Every 28 seconds, a car in the U.S. is stolen. Don't become the next victim. In times like these, a little extra precaution can go a long way. Never leave your keys in the ignition. Always lock doors and keep windows closed. Equip your car with an alarm or other theft deterrent device. If you become a victim of auto theft, report it immediately to your local law enforcement agency. To learn more about protecting yourself from auto theft, visit ncpc.org.
A message from the U.S. Department of Justice, National Crime Prevention Council, and the Ad Council.
Hello, David Karnowski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I saw this tweet by Sarah Abdallah. She says, Bill Clinton starves 500,000 kids to death in Iraq with criminal sanctions and gets a podcast. Julian Assange, meanwhile, publishes the truth about U.S. war crimes and faces torture, persecution, and life imprisonment. I'm here with retired Army Major Danny Shorson, author of the new book, Patriotic Descent, which is out this week. You can check it out online, Patriotic Descent, America in the Age of Endless War. Danny, do you ever think that perhaps we have underestimated how vicious and barbaric the human species is, and that's why folks like Bill Clinton get an iHeartMedia podcast deal with an awful record of abusing human life in various ways around the world, and then Julian Assange is getting persecuted like he's a serial killer? It's just disturbing. Like if you were from another planet and you came and you're like, what a barbaric, this is like Klingons or something, you know what I mean? Very vicious, violent little creatures here.
Well, absolutely, but remember that, ours is a society, not unlike Israel's in this case, where, arguably war criminals can get the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Barack Obama, although he hadn't done most of his most evil things yet, Shimon Peres, of course, in Israel. I mean, we give like official prizes for peace. I mean, that's how through the looking glass we are. That's how 1984 this all becomes. It's like a newspeak to folks who are responsible for mass death. And then, of course, in the more media sphere, social media, et cetera, yeah, we give podcasts to these folks. But if you step out of turn or speak out of turn, like someone like Assange or Chelsea Manning did, or other whistleblowers, of which, of course, Barack Obama was responsible for prosecuting more than any other president in history, right, since the Espionage Act, then you will be attacked. Your character will be defamed and your freedom is at risk. But someone like Madeleine Albright will never, for the rest of her life, be short of job offers and very wealthy speaking engagements to talk about how wonderful it was to be the first female Secretary of State, when, of course, she is the person who said that she thought, quote, the cost was worth it for 500,000 Iraqi children to die as a result of our sanctions before we invaded, and another million or so died.
I want to ask you, kind of related to that, you deal with a lot of progressives and people on the left with your media work and your engagements around various major publications. But I want to get your take. Why is it, because I know you're more independent politically than a lot of the folks on the left, but why is it that so many on the left, they talk a big game about, people of color and their lives mattering, and yet, they don't see how evil it is that, their preferred candidates want to basically perpetuate the bombing and drone strikes of people of color around the world. I'm for all human life being treated sacred, but they make a particular thing, like the New York Times. They talk about the 1619 Project, but they covered for the butchering of Libyans, which unleashed a modern-day slave trade, and not a peep out of those people. And it's like, how can you live with such severe cognitive dissonance of shilling for and pushing and covering up and selling blatant, violent attacks against people of color around the world, and then go around and lecture the whole country saying, shame on you if you don't stand for our slogans and all of our things that we have. But it's like, wait a second, you guys are progressive. How can you be for this stuff? Can you give me some insight into how they're processing this? Because I don't get it.
I truly, truly wish that I had a perfect answer to that question or an explanation. I don't know what's in their hearts, but I know that it's obscene. I think in a general sense, one must remember that much of the rhetoric on the left is, not to overuse the word, surface level and cosmetic. And there's a very narrow spectrum for what and who they really care about. And so you have situations where we don't talk about class, we talk about race. We should talk about race, but we ignore things like class. We also ignore foreigners. That's another element that's generally outside of the polite boundaries of who matters in our, sort of PC culture. I'm for most of the ideas behind this PC, but let's keep this in mind. 5 days after George Floyd is killed by the police, a Palestinian autistic man, unarmed, is cornered like an animal and shot to death by Israeli police. Okay? But remember that on much of the left, we have these things called PEPs, right? Progressive Accept Palestine. So we do not value those lives, brown lives overseas, that we often kill or our allies do. And I think that is so instructive about who these people really are in the left establishment.
Well, Danny Shorsen, it's always a pleasure to have you on. And I want everybody to go and check out your book, Patriotic Dissent, America in the Age of Endless War. A great purchase to make today on 9/11 or whenever you're listening to this program. Thanks for joining me, Danny.
So glad to be here. Talk soon.
I'm David Gornosky. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. Remember, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. We'll be back in just a moment. Godspeed.